Yo, what is going on, everybody? It's Brave Cat here once again with the weekly earthquake update, and I've got a lot more to cover than that, actually. I'll be covering some things that I have not covered yet, including space weather and the Earth's magnetic field, the poles moving, stuff like that. So stay tuned, because there's more than just earthquakes and more than just volcanism. So, we start out here with the last 7 days on the USGS feed, where we've had some interesting developments here. So, there's been quite a handful of new deep earthquakes. Alright, noted here mostly by Fiji. And again, this overlay here, thanks to Dutch Synths, credit goes there for this map overlay, which is incredibly useful and takes into account years and years of watching quakes, seeing how they develop, seeing how the pressure transfers. So all these arrows, these X's, these letter D's, they all mean something and they all correlate pretty well. So we've had deep earthquakes by Japan as well. So these deep earthquakes here is really our biggest, the biggest thing we're looking at right now. So we have all these by Fiji. We have some deep earthquakes here near the Philippines and just north of Australia. You know, this is like really the main hot spot here. Let's kind of get some of this stuff cluttered out of the way here to focus on the bigger quakes that have happened. So the Indo-Australian plate is still has a tremendous amount of movement happening. There's another 6 here. And then up here by the Philippines, you know, these could mostly be some aftershocks from the 7 that was strike here, but also, you know, newer activity just based off of everything else that's been happening. You know, Kamchatka still, of course, has massive swarming. You know, some of this is aftershock potential, but a lot of it it's just still swarming here. Quite a lot of pressure here, bumping up against the west coast plate here, and so there was an expected, like it was expected to see some potentially larger activity off of the west coast, up to, you know, anything up to a 6 potentially, but that didn't happen, and instead we've seen an influx of earthquakes inside the United States, even in Colorado. It's pretty rare to see earthquakes in Colorado, but there's been some here, and, you know, these are just 3s, but they're actually still really significant to see. You know, 3s in certain other areas don't really mean much, but here on the, you know, the inside, the craton of the United States, seeing 3s like this, definitely what we can get from that is that the pressure that was likely to hit the west coast has instead moved inland. So we've got a bunch here down in Texas, New Mexico, and, you know, again, even Colorado. So it's like the pressure has moved on instead of hitting the west coast, which is a good thing for the west coast. You know, does it mean that there's still potential for a bigger quake? Yeah. But it's been tricky to really size that up because, you know, it's such a complex area seismically. You know, we don't know, we can never know for sure how accurate all of the reporting is. There could be stuff going on off the west coast that we don't know about. There could be other factors. And then we also see an influx of pressure moving down south back into South America. Kind of around here as well is where we've seen some, like last week I said there was some new volcanoes cropping up here. And okay, this is getting harder to report on these things considering the government shutdown. And so a lot of relevant agencies just aren't updating anything, such as the Smithsonian, and, wow, really everything. I mean, seriously, it's ridiculous. But, you know, we can do our best here. So, you know, down on the southern tip here, close to Antarctica, in the Drake Passage, we've been seeing You know, potentially still aftershocks happening from the 7.4, 7.6, whatever to happen there. And that pressure is moving off into the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Let me turn this down a little bit here. So, yeah, it's almost Halloween, so we got our little candy corn kitty down there for improved moral support. So if we take a look at Europe here, there was a 3.9 in Scotland, and so, you know, this was mentioned from Dutch, where this is actually really close to a dormant supervolcano over here, kind of on the like western tip here, one of these peninsula type formations. There's actually a dormant supervolcano here, and this is like some village right in Scotland. So I don't know much about this. You know, I had it brought up on Google Earth. That's what I wanted. So yeah, I've got it here. Now I can actually tilt it so you can actually see the crater. So yeah, this is actually a crater from a supervolcano. It's ancient. You know, I'm not saying it's like waking up or doing anything right now, but you know, 3.9 that struck kind of in the, you know, more in the middle of Scotland, but still it's relevant when we're looking at some of these volcanic areas here. So that was kind of just something of note, and so that pressure will be moving on north. We've had some more activity here in Poland. Now let's see. So I haven't looked at all of this, so we're just kind of going through it as we see it here. Lots of stuff new happening in the Middle East. What is this, like Iran, Afghanistan kind of area? Quite a bit of a swarm, actually. You know, that's a handful of, you know, mid-range 4s to 5 activity, including some slightly deep ones here. So let's see, I think I've got one of those highlighted. We can just take a quick look. All right, 200 kilometers depth. That's nothing too crazy, but all right. Well, I guess we'll hit up the space weather here in a second. Let me just kind of cover the rest of this here. Let's see if any other feeds are popping up with anything interesting. So let's just really quickly, you know, let's kind of start again in the Indo-Australian plate. Haven't looked at the New Zealand feed here. So this is a 0.0 and greater. So there's, you know, all these tremors, all these smaller quakes here. And this is again right where our deep earthquakes have been happening by Fiji. And that energy kind of transfers down. And then if we pull up the Australia feed here, we can take a look at what's going on here. So got a pretty even peppering on the south side here, just, you know, 2s and 3s. But again, this can be kind of comparable to what we see, you know, in the, you know, the inner side of the United States, where, you know, even with all this crazy stuff going on over here, you know, you're not usually going to typically see, you know, anything above 3s, you know, striking in here, even with all this. So it is still kind of significant seeing these pepperings of 2s and 3s in Australia. It just means, you know, the plate's moving, there's pressure transferring, and hopefully we don't see anything major there. So, and this just, I mean, these 5s, again, they just keep going up all the way, pretty equidistantly, you know, all the way up here. So that's kind of where that's at. Let's take a look at the Europe feed. Gets that middle one we like to look at. So let's see here, what's going on in Western Turkey. It looks like things have kind of slowed down here. So what is this? What is this one here? It's the last 100 quakes, 2.5 and greater. So yeah, we don't really have a time frame on this. I wish they just did, like, you know, the last 7 days or whatever. But this is the last 100 earthquakes, and so most of them here are 2s and 3s. But there is, you know, again, those quakes hitting Poland, kind of, mid-range 4. And even the, over here, what is this, like close to Belgium or something? I'm actually not sure. I don't know all my geography, but so, not as much activity as we've expected, given, how many 6s and 7s have been going on anyway. But let's just kind of give a rough little recap before I move on to the other stuff I want to cover. So again, it's these deep earthquakes that are going to be perpetuating the, pretty moderate to almost severe activity that we've been seeing. So there is definitely, again, a bit of a warning for Japan, especially with these new deep earthquakes here. And along the entire Indo-Australian plate, kind of, from New Zealand to the Philippines kind of area, it could be expected to see something up to a 7 or even a mid-range 7, again, popping up somewhere in this area. Let me turn it all down here and kind of, and this, again, like I'm getting this advice, this information, mostly from Dutch Sense, from what I can gather here, because this whole ridge here, this whole plate, you kind of see it wraps around the letter D. So it wraps around and it kind of goes up to the Philippines. So that's kind of the spot that's being watched. Kind of it's a pretty large area, but again, that's kind of what's expected there, given all the deep earthquakes and the other activity we've been seeing. So that's kind of where that is. Now let's focus on some of the other things I wanted to cover. So let's hit up the tremor map really quick, and then we will talk about some of the space weather, some of the magnetic, Earth's magnetic field kind of stuff. So there's some pretty gnarly stuff, and things that have been quite extensively researched, not necessarily up front, like in terms of mainstream. So okay, what is this? So this is the 21st. This is yesterday. All right, so we have 78. That is quite a downtrend. So if we just take a look at the last week here, and then this graph up here. So in the last couple of days here, we've seen a very sharp decline in tremors, which again, given everything that we're seeing up here and across the plate, and even on the other side of the world, like over here, it's not really too good seeing things quiet on these tremors. Now we can simultaneously bring up the 0.0 feed for the US. We'll do last 7 days, but we'll only look at maybe the last couple days because there's so many. So there is still obviously a lot of tremors coming in here reported, like in California, especially on the southern side, and then also right in the San Francisco Bay, like just north of it actually. It looks like we have a considerable tremor swarm there. And so, we kind of compare that to what we see here. Here's San Francisco. That's where the other swarm is showing up. And then the tremor map here is showing us everything north of that. So going up into Oregon, Washington, into Vancouver, this is where we've been seeing most of the tremors. So there is still a lot of pressure coming in. And wow, this has been changing every time I look at it. So last time I looked at it like this, there still is kind of that polarity of, the southeast part has a lot of the older stuff, and then the newer stuff is popping up kind of in the northwest side of this cluster here. So, it just kind of indicates the amount of pressure that's coming in and testing this whole plate boundary. So, seeing these tremors releasing the pressure is a good sign. So that's why, if we see a continued downtrend in these tremors here, then that could mean there's some sort of buildup leading to something bigger. So still got eyes open there, but so far it looks like California's been able to avoid anything super major, which is good. But again, everybody in this area definitely needs to be aware of the potential and, all of that. Okay, so let's look into some of the things that I haven't talked about yet, at least, on this channel, but I've been following for quite some time, which is space weather, and which is, the tracking of the magnetic fields. So if we go here, this is NOAA, this is, government website here, and they have the poles. So they've been tracking the poles because they've been moving. All right. So take a look at the top left and the bottom right of this map. So, we have the North Pole, and we got the South Pole down here. And then this represents the movement. So let's take it through slowly here. So this is going all the way back to 1590. So, we're going decades, hundreds of years here. So that southern pole has quite a bit of movement in, that kind of 100 to 150 year time span. But the North Pole doesn't actually move a whole lot yet. And then, okay, we get to, about 1800, that's still moving. It's slowing down a little bit. And then the north side, pay attention to what happens up here. Let me just zoom in on it to make it more clear. So again, this isn't the physical pole, this is the magnetic pole that's moving. So, it's staying up here, and then, once it gets right about here, it starts zooming. All right, so 1860. All right, let's keep moving it up here. 1900. 1900 is about when the South Pole down here slows down majorly, and then the North Pole really picks up. And before I even show the rest of this, you can just see from these dotted lines, I mean, it is racing towards Russia. It's going straight towards, like, Siberia. And of course, you got the anomaly, the magnetic anomaly there in South America that's kind of moving in. But see, look at that. So, okay, this goes up to 2030, but we're really just looking at the last 2 decades here. So it's like 2003, and then it's like, bam, it just really starts going. It just starts going. And this is in combination with the weakening of the magnetic field. So these are two things here that I'm talking about that are literally measured, literally recorded, and are actually happening right before our very eyes. There's no speculation that the poles are moving and the magnetic field is weakening. And so, especially with how exponential we see the speed happening with both of those things, it's an excursion event. It's not one of those, wandering pole situations that happens over hundreds of thousands of years. No, this is an excursion. It happens, potentially within a human lifetime. And the biggest, proponent, researcher, and theorist of this whole thing is from, Space Weather News. They have a YouTube channel, Ben Davidson. I've been following them for close to a decade now. I'm like 26, and I've been paying attention to this roughly since about when I got out of high school. So it's been a while, and every day that goes on, there's just more evidence for it, and space weather is important. It's more important than a lot of the crap you might hear about regarding things like this in the mainstream. So even if you just look it up on Google, it has it here too. You got the South Atlantic anomaly, which they're saying caused by the movement of the molten iron core. That's one part of it, but that's definitely not the cause. It's just one part of it. And so, but bare minimum, what this means right now, and what we've been seeing is, more impacts from space weather. So that's why we've been seeing auroras at low latitudes. If you're like, oh, you see sometimes in the news that we've had auroras as far south as like Arizona, Florida. That's not normal. And especially given the fact that these things have been happening just when we have mild to even moderate space weather. So, when we have a coronal hole hit us. So on this website here, these feeds at the very top, for some reason they've been stuck like this. This is actually a view from the sun like over a month ago now. So these have not updated on this website, but you can still see, so this here is a coronal hole. This one from a month ago, it's kind of shaped like a butterfly, which is kind of cool. But what this does, these coronal holes, they give an influx of, they push up the solar winds and they impact the planet, not just with auroras, but with even, affecting earthquakes and seismology, volcanoes, because basically, the visible light that we see coming from the sun is such a small fraction of the total solar particles that get released. So there's a lot of influence that the sun has on the Earth every day, every second, with everything that happens, which should make sense because, the sun, it kind of takes up, 98% of the mass in the solar system and is responsible for all life on Earth. So, why wouldn't it affect everything on Earth? And especially when the Earth's magnetic field weakens. Like, look at this here. So this is the KP index. Let me just zoom in a little bit on that. So we had some geomagnetic instability over the weekend. And that was due to, again, really minor solar activity. Like we had another coronal hole stream hit us and a few kind of M-class solar flares. And it caused a level of instability that usually wouldn't happen from such little events, So that's the danger is, if we do get something big from the sun, a large coronal mass ejection, like as we see on this X-ray flux, you got M-class flares and then you have X-class flares. Well, we've only had a couple of M-class flares, and that's what we see here in the instability is when that happened. So we covered that. That's what's happening. That's also why we've been seeing such an influx of activity, because on the earthquake side and volcanically and with these deep earthquakes, it all correlates together. We have literally every single field of science that can relate to all these things, and as they affect the biosphere, the ionosphere, everything in between and everything underneath. So, because these solar particles, they have electromagnetic properties, and, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I've been studying it for a while, so I kind of know a lot of the key terms and some of the basic effects of these things, but, I don't know everything, so you can always do your own research and homework and follow along with, these frontier levels of science. So, speaking of frontier levels of science, I'm actually working on my own website right now. Let me refresh. I added a couple things. So this here, just started working on this. It's still in the very preliminary phases. And I want it to be, kind of like this. So it's going to have it's going to have live feeds of multiple kinds. But we have right now what I have working. And this is just on my computer. This is not being hosted anywhere yet because it's, I'm still working on it. But we got some earthquake feeds on here. So eventually this will be a lot more fleshed out with hopefully different agencies, as well as volcanism, floods, droughts, tropical storms, and wildfires. So, I've just got some basic functionality in here. You can take a look at the map. And so this gives another view here. So this is actually a pretty useful view to have, because then we see, just a plain view of all of the tremor and bigger seismic activity combined in this nice little map leaflet. So this will be expanded here. We're going to have the KP index down here, other space weather feeds. I got a API key from NASA, so I'll be trying to implement this at some point soon, but this website's going to have way more than that. So we want to have historical data and archives, so we're going to have data tables for past earthquake history, volcanic history, and whatever else we can find. And then we have some publications and papers from scientific articles. So the only thing, I only have one thing on here right now. Again, it's still work in progress. But for example, first off, we have this important paper, which I guess I'll link this in the description. I'm not going to show you it right here. But this is Reviews of Geophysics, the role of geomagnetic field intensity and as it relates to the biosphere. So evolution of humans and large animals. And it talks about these geomagnetic excursions. So I'm going to have a lot of different resources here. This is really just the beginning. Hopefully I can get this to a point where it can be hosted somewhere. And then of course I got to do a whole bunch of kind of bug testing and see how it works on mobile. So then we have imagery here. This is an image, again, from Space Weather News YouTube channel. This was just an interesting image from one of the videos a couple years ago that showed basically a combined image. So you see these different feeds up here. Well, this is basically a combined view overlaying all these different wavelengths and angstroms that are measured. And what you get out of it is, you see the green and the red right here in the middle, for example. These are the different magnetic polarities within a sunspot group. And this is what causes coronal mass ejections, is when the magnetic polarities basically, get clustered together and, like putting two magnets together that are going the wrong way, they're going to want to push each other away. That's what happens on the sun on a very large scale. So that's the magnetic properties visualized here that causes these things to happen. So that was just an interesting image, and we're going to hopefully have a whole bunch of other stuff. So that's kind of what I've been working on. And it, again, it ties into everything. So yeah, quite a lot of stuff here. Still going to be, of course, watching this to see what goes on. But yeah, there's very great forces at work on this planet. So I'm going to leave things off with this coronagraph, because what happened actually is that this here, so you see that, this is a CME on the far side of the sun. So this was not Earth directed. This was directed away from Earth. But guess what's over there? On the other side of the sun in that general area, guess what's over there? Well, that's 3i Atlas. So yeah, I've been following along on some of the stuff with 3i Atlas. It's really hard to know for sure. Like seems to be so many different theories, a lot of extreme viewpoints. I'm not going to be here to tell you that it's aliens or that it's a comet either. I don't think it's a comet, but it's something, okay? It's something, I'm not saying I don't know what it is exactly, but it's clear that it's something abnormal, but it's also something that seems to be right on schedule for the events that we see happening on Earth. It's like a great universal synchronicity, and I don't think it's anything to be afraid of. 3i Atlas, I don't think people should be scared of it, and I think that's why you see a lot of clickbait and a lot of rage bait and a lot of fear mongering over 3i Atlas, is because well, that's just how the news cycle works now, is to just be afraid of everything that you shouldn't be afraid of. And then, when it comes to the things that you should be afraid of, like the poles moving, the magnetic field weakening, well, that's not even talked about. So, there is things to be scared of, but you got to put your fear in the right place that actually makes sense, So again, just keep your eyes open And that'll be it for this one, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you all in the next one.